This panel is proudly sponsored by Doist.
Welcome back to Running Remote Online. My name is Danny Page. Momentarily, we will talk with these three heavy hitters about optimizing remote work for the new normal. Johnny from Hopin, Øyvind from Whereby, and of course, Amir from Doist. I just have a couple notes for you in our audience. Remember, update your profiles for better networking. Find my profile, add me on LinkedIn, connect with me directly there. Just a couple of housekeeping notes too. If you're having any issues with the connection, Chrome works best. We are not sponsored by Google, okay? And of course, to be able to best view, if you are on mobile, download the Hopin mobile app, Google Play App Store to follow along. And the last note, you know, 3 of the 4 of us here are actually in Barcelona. So if you are a Spanish attendee or a German attendee, you can listen to the sessions on stage 1 in your native languages. You can follow along. Just click the translation tab. Wow. No Catalan though, okay? So that's that could be a problem for some people in Barcelona. These 3 gentlemen really need no introduction. Amir, I'll hand it straight to you. Optimizing remote work for the new normal. As I said in the open of today's entire show, it's almost like just normal now, right? And it's interesting for individuals, especially Amir, you've been doing this for nearly 15 years with Doist, building a remote company. So we're excited to hear your perspective today.
Awesome. Thank you, Danny. So yeah, we have already talked a bit, and I think we are going in a really hopefully nice session where we cover a lot of really hard topics and also maybe interesting topics as well. Yeah. So just to give some notes about what we want to talk about, maybe is maybe just a light introduction. I'm actually not sure if you already have been introduced, but maybe a light introduction to the companies that you represent yourself. And then we will go in challenges. You know, it's not really all pina coladas. And then hyperscaling, especially I think Johnny could have some real insights here because, but also Øyvind, you have also been on a hiring spree last year, and then maybe also fundraising could also be. I think a lot of people would be interested in just hearing about this. And I think this also changed a lot in last year, where suddenly investors accept remote companies. And then another thing that I'm interested in really maybe talking more deep about is remote sales, because I think that's also something that is being explored. And of course, asynchronous, which is something that is dear to my heart, and being kind of talk a bit about that. Yeah, so let's maybe just hit it off with just a general introduction of yourself and just what does your company do? Yeah.
Johnny, you go first.
Sure. So I'm founder of Hopin. Hopin is a virtual experiences platform that allows people to connect with each other, and through quite a few products that we have. The main one is, or the first one was the events product, which we're using now in the Hopin event. But StreamYard also allows streamers and creators to connect with their audiences and businesses. And we also have Streamable and Jam, which they'll be in the near future.
Johnny, just a note. I mean, I looked at your last valuation. It's over 5 billion, which is probably one of the most valued remote first companies right now, which is really something. Yeah, of course, valuation is kind of it's quite ritual, but it's still very impressive. So
it's Did you not see the inflation markers? It's an inflated market,
All right, everyone. My name is Øyvind. Good to meet you all. I'm the CEO at Whereby. Whereby, for those that don't know the name and the brand, is a video calling platform known for its extreme ease of use. And we try and be different from the regular players out there. We focus on a calmer design, a nicer touch to the video calls themselves. We currently offer two products. One is the meeting platform that most users have seen and know from before. But we also have an embedded piece where we allow companies to take our platform and embed it into their own workflows and applications. So delighted to be here. Super exciting topic. So we should just probably kick it off, Amir.
I mean, let's do this. So like one of the first topics we can just touch on is like challenges, like what is currently like the biggest struggle for you, and maybe also just like what has been like historically the biggest struggle. Like that's something that I would really love to hear a bit more about. So let's kick it off with like Johnny. Well, what are your nightmares? So like
I think there's a few tricky things. It depended on the size of the company. I think there's challenges, really big challenges come at different phases of company size. I think for me, the first hurdle I can remember for me that was really severe was raising money. That was actually, I mean, it sounds crazy now, but it was so difficult for me. I'd sent thousands of emails out to investors. I didn't have any connections in London. That was part of the reason why I thought Hopin was so it is good, because you can connect with investors and like meet them. I was actually attending events, tons of events in London, and the first ever investor, I mean, I sent literally 1,000 emails with different, like, it was still the same product, but everyone said it sucked. I mean, or they didn't respond. I didn't understand why. But when I met them in person, or met them on a call, like video call or on person, I was able to usually get them to like go to the second and third interview, but second and third phase, and and that's when the first investment. But it was about a 7-month process to raise our first funding round. Like truly, wow. Not 7 months, maybe 5 to 7 months. I didn't have any connections, and I didn't have any warm intros, so that was difficult for me. And then from about 5 to 20 people was difficult. And I think for me as a founder, you have to learn to scale yourself. I like coding, I like designing, and I realized that, hey, my job now is selling. It's convincing people to join the company. It's convincing, it's setting up organizational structures. And then, from 25 to 400, it's all a scale. It's all a scale and organizational journey, and there's a lot of problems that come up, teething problems. How do you make sure people are communicating efficiently? Amir obviously building great products for people to be able to do that, but it is tricky, especially remote, because you don't know what the culture is going to set up. So there's been a lot of teething issues for us. It's like, okay, how many meetings should we have? How many how do we scribe at the end of the meeting? Should someone always write down to-dos and etc.? How do we follow up? And now I think going into the next phase is where we figured that out, and we're getting into a company much larger as a company, and looking to scale up. It's making our products, staying innovative, because the bigger you get, the harder it is to I don't want to say it's harder to innovate, but you're not as quick to make, you're not as nimble. And I want to stay as nimble, and that's a big problem today. It's that, well, a big problem it's not like a problem that has been killing us, but it's like, well, what am I focused on today from an organizational structure? Is keeping the company very nimble. So that's that. I hope those are helpful.
I think you're onto something very vital, Johnny, and this is this different stages, right? Because in my experience, different stages comes with different sets of challenges, and I think even more so in a remote setting. We've always been remote. We've always encouraged everyone to work wherever they want, and so we are on a mission to make anywhere work, basically, right? But the only way to do that is also by being open about the challenges that brings to the table. And I can clearly remember that it was easier for us to communicate as a team when we were between 5 and 20 people. But then the more you start scaling, the more people you put on, even expanding the time zones, you have a much bigger issue, just like you mentioned, Johnny, with, okay, how many meetings do we have? Do we do everything synchronously compared to doing asynchronously? And even though I run a company that does video conferencing, we have clearly seen that that doesn't solve all the challenges here. We have to have a combination of asynchronous communication and synchronous communications. And so defining what sort of actions are to be done on those different levers, I think it's important, and for every company to be aware of the challenges. Because I think we all, the three of us, care deeply about a future in where you can access talent from anywhere and your location isn't a problem for you in order to get the really cool jobs. But if we just talk about all the benefits and whoop-de-doo, it's super easy, I think we're doing ourselves a disservice. So we actually owe it to ourselves and the listeners to be open about some of those challenges.
Yeah, I mean, I think you folks touch on so many like different like angles here, and also like just we can go in like in any topic and like talk about like for hours. I think, yeah, so something like just from my perspective that I can really relate to is like things starting to fall apart at the different stages, and then you kind of need to reinvent yourself and your team and your culture and your processes. And I think maybe like this is kind of accelerating in a remote setting. So maybe, you know, like, yeah, at least for us, like I remember like one of the years we went maybe from like 10, 20 people to like 50, and everything just fell apart. Like we were actually much less productive. Nothing got done. A lot of like issues, and then like we were just like, what is happening here? Like, you know, like why is this happening? And then yeah, like we didn't have any, you know, structures in place to actually support more people. Yeah.
I think that's sorry to interrupt, Amir, but I think that's a vital part of this as well, right? That you have to understand that in order to take on people remotely, you need a supporting function, someone that understands how you actually onboard that amount of people in a good way, to teach them about how things are done at this company and be very clear on the expectations, right? Because with remote work comes tons of flexibility. But flexibility is a two-way street, right? That also means that you have to make, as an individual, adjustments. It doesn't mean that everyone in the company has to adjust to a single individual. It is very much a two-way street. So having someone that can actually help onboard properly, that has been a game changer for us when we invested in a people team that do a phenomenal job. I don't know where we would be if it weren't for that crew, to be honest, because I felt the same. Like things are starting to fall apart and you feel like you're going from one crisis to the next. So I can totally relate.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a very, very good tip. Maybe like I think also something that we have been like really bad at doing that is kind of investing in the people, like HR function. Like I think maybe you need to like be much more proactive with this, and we have not really been. And even like right now, like I think we're still very understaffed on this. So maybe that could be like a cheat, you know, code for people that are starting, like just, you know, hire a HR person sooner than later. Yeah.
I concur for sure. It's been a huge change. We've have a culture and a vibe team. It's like we have, you know, once we noticed that Øyvind, as you mentioned, and Amir, that how much of a difference that onboarding made, we've like tripled down on hiring people to just improve the culture, improve onboarding.
So let's maybe touch on onboarding. Like what are the cheat codes that people can apply, like based on like a lot of learnings you folks have done?
I think for us there are a couple of things, and obviously this is always dynamic, right? So we are improving every day. I see the people team with us are so eager to get feedback from people that they have onboarded on how they can improve the experience. For me, it's about making sure, especially at the level that we are growing, is that you make things almost automatic, right? So that you actually, one thing we did that I really liked was that every executive recorded a 40-minute session on people, so they could on themselves, so people could get to know them just by looking at those videos, right? And just get a feel and an understand for, okay, what is it that makes Øyvind tick? What is it that makes Øyvind frustrated that I should probably know about in advance? Like there are small things, but where you can almost like do an automated process of it and have a lot of things in writing so people can actually consume that content in their own time rather than rely on a lot of people holding hand in the process. So that's one thing that I've seen has had major impact with us, at least.
That's a cool tip.
Yeah, I think for us there's been, so we have a few. I was debating whether or not I should mention it because it's going to sound like I'm selling Hopin again. But truly, we use a lot of Hopin to do our onboarding. Our all hands are in Hopin. We use StreamYard to make it feel cool, play videos, etc., etc. We start it with a music video. Everybody gets hyped, and there's a lot of cool features in terms of like the for running onboarding events. Like we run them every time someone joins. There's like a 1 week onboarding with different sessions. We're basically running a 1 week conference for them with different sessions that talk about different parts of the company. And we do it once a month for people who are joining. It's been a pretty cool hack for us, but the Vibe team is outstanding. Like, you know, when you're remote, you need to double down on investing in the things that you can. So like we have, you know, meditation nights, we have like poker. There's pokers for some teams. They set up play poker, you know, together. Some teams play like, I don't know, Call of Duty, like, but there's like a rotor and they help with almost every single one of these sort of things. So there's always something going on within the company. And we try our best to like just maintain like a really strong vibe. I mean, that's why we call it the Vibe team. It's just the people feel extremely warm and part of something really, really great.
So Johnny, just to understand, like this Vibe team, it's like the first time I hear about it. Is like you just have people that are like just doing like cultural events for the company and like just trying to and how many people do you have? Like
there are three people on that team. They do everything from the all hands. So typical all hands, you know, it's just like one person speaking. Ours is like truly, it's like a TV show. Every week they like construct it like a TV show with different segments with like they bring in great speakers. Sometimes it really feels like we're doubling down on that. They're the ones who set up this onboarding sort of setup of these running these events quite constantly. They also work on like we have like a what's on at Hopin, like here a Loom video which we take where someone takes and like goes through, because it's hard to tell everybody what's happening in marketing, what's happening in events, what's on it. So they have like this like weekly running async thing. It's just watch, you know, this is what everything you might have missed throughout the week at different products, but they spend a lot of time like improving the actual like, because it has to be fun to watch, so that they really make it super valuable. They do these shout out channels, all these other things, essentially Slack bots and setting up events for smaller events throughout the week for people to attend and have fun, games, trivia,
I think if I can add, because not everyone has the resources to put on a full-blown TV show like Johnny does, right? So, but what I would recommend for people is to get started and just realize how important this part of building a remote company actually is, and then start. Even if you have a low baseline, get started and then improve on the process, just like you would building your product, right? You put it out and you have people experience it. They give feedback and you iterate and you improve constantly, right? Because for us, it took us a long time from where we started to get to a level now that we feel is pretty good. We have a long way to go until we say it's perfect. So I would just recommend for the smaller teams watching, right, that you have to do it in a step-by-step manner. And doing asynchronous Loom videos, I think, is a really strong idea that helps a tremendous amount of information sharing without needing to do a full-blown town hall where you get everyone into the same room. Like I said, you have to find a balance between when you do a full-blown synchronous situation versus asynchronous.
Yeah, I mean, Øyvind, I really love that you promote a lot like the asynchronous thought, you know, like that warms my heart, you know, like the, yeah.
Yeah, my investors are probably looking at this and thinking, what the H is he doing? No, but I think it's important, right? Because this is where I feel the world of tech needs to be more open and say, okay, we all need to promote our companies and we all bring something, right? The fact to me is that if I have a user that is spending 5 hours a day on the video platform and paying for the user, or that person is spending 2 hours on the video platform, but those 2 hours are seen as very, very valuable and actually makes that user more happy and more productive. Well, long term, that's actually a very wise business decision for us to make. So I think like more openness around that kind of situation. Yes, I'm always plugging my product, and that's my job. Just like Johnny said, that's part of what we do now. We hire people and we plug and sell the product. But at the same time, it has to be a nuance in there to get remote to work properly. And don't get me wrong, I think synchronous video is a key part of building a remote culture where you can jump on calls super fast and very easy. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah, I mean, that's also something that like a lot of people, like when they hear like asynchronous, they think like it's all communication should be done asynchronously, and that's like kind of like the really wrong path. Like that is a path to disaster, as well as like, you know, just like doing everything synchronous as well. Like that isn't really a good idea. So it's really like a balance act, I think. Yeah, and also like I think also for me, like one of the biggest changes that we did inside the company was like one-on-one meetings and really becoming good at those, because there, you know, you build rapport with people. You know, you really can go deep onto like personal issues, provide critical feedback without like, you know, like public shaming of something or something like that. Like, and then it's also just like if you go in and like provide radical candor to somebody, like you don't want to do that usually in text. Like that's probably like a very bad idea in most cases. Yeah, so you want to deliver that like to like you know, so you have like the body language, the voice, and everything, and you can also just like see how they receive that. Yeah. So, you know, like let's maybe like go into the like asynchronous. Yeah. So I would love to know. I mean, Øyvind, it seems like you're trying to incorporate this more into the company. I also know, Johnny, like you want to really go fast. So like asynchronous is maybe not really that compatible with like hyperscaling and like when you need to make decisions very fast. So I would just, you know, let's maybe start on the company level. Like, how do you think about this? And then maybe we can also go on the product level and see like, yeah, like especially you folks, like you're doing like synchronous products and like,
yeah. I wouldn't say so we've learned to be more and more async. Starting off, we were big fans of sync because, and so we tried products like Tandem and quite a few others that were like live, you know, you could just quickly get in a call. We didn't find they worked really well past a certain scale, but they were really good up to, you know, 20 people in a small pod, and some small pods in Hopin, or which are like groups of, let's say, engineers that are working on some project or squad are working, you know, we'll be using one of these tools. So we stayed sync for the main reason of we were hyperscaling, and at a hyperscale, sometimes like you work on different time zones, and if you don't get the, like if we wrote an article, for example, about what we're deciding, and then someone comments on it, then another person comments on it the next day when they wake up, and then the next night someone comments on it when they get back to respond to the comment, well, what ends up happening is we wasted 3 days. That's not always the case, but it happened enough for us that we were like, basically, you're taking any decisions, you're getting on a call and you're staying on the call until you solve it. And if you're not prepared for it and you need more time, then you set up another call, and in between you do the work. So we don't have tons of meetings, but we do utilize meetings as a way to make things move faster. You know, as the company gets bigger, we need to be more and more async. That's for sure, because after a certain amount, you need people to be an async, whether that's a video recording that's being, you know, contextualized and handed out to the rest of the people who are stakeholders in the meeting, or whether it's actually just writing down a big, you know, note or PRD. But we use Notion, you know, we use Todoist as well. Like we use lots of different products in order to make sure that we're kind of able to follow on with what we need to do and make sure that it's an async and a sync strategy. But meetings for us are incredibly important.
I think it makes a ton of sense what Johnny is saying, right? I don't think we should try and put one way up against the other. I 100% agree that it depends on also the decision-making process that you're in, right? Some things are extremely urgent and should be treated as such. And I feel the same as Johnny. There's no way better to resolve that than jumping on a call, airing those differences, and disagree and commit, because you can't really have decision by committee at the level and the pace that this market is moving, right? So I think deciding as a team as well and having some sort of process around, okay, which decisions does require a certain level of buy-in and from whom, and here are some of the ideas we think that you can go about getting that done faster. So you actually look at the decision, how critical is it, how fast does it need to happen, versus some things that need more data to support the decision-making process, for instance. So, but this is, I find this is a really challenging and interesting thing, right? Because let's be fair, everyone has been used to the office. That's what people have been doing for 60, 70, 80 years almost. This remote is a new way of working. We now have a lot of tools, but we need to change and adapt as humans. And that's a far more difficult thing to do, right? We have to retrain a lot of minds and a lot of people to think in a different way. Just like you said, Amir, on how do you conduct proper one-on-ones over video compared to being with someone in the office and grabbing them over the shoulder and patting them on the back, right? Because you can see they need it. Well, if everyone is remote, you miss a lot of that. Okay, so what can we do to replace it with that same emotion almost? Those are the tricky and challenging things. But we have to accept that there will be lots of learning and failing and iterating as we go along in this process.
Yeah. I mean, this decision-making in a remote setting is quite a challenge, especially like if time zones are related, and especially like in asynchronous first environment. I think like that is kind of like really, really tough. And something actually like that we have done is like we have actually gotten inspired by like Apple's like DRI, directly responsible individual framework. And like that has actually been a huge game changer for us. Like we called it DRD, directly responsible doister. And then like everything needs to have like one person that's like responsible and accountable for something. And that can make like things go much faster because like you don't do like decision making by committee. Honestly, like I'm very allergic like for anything that's being done in a committee because like you don't really know like who actually is accountable, who is responsible for something. And then like, yeah, it can also just like if things go wrong, like, you know, who should be the responsible person. And even like if things go great, like you also don't really know like, you know, who has actually been driving the force behind like something. So for us, like in asynchronous environment, I think like actually that's the only way you can go. Like it's kind of like in empowering individuals and just like, because else like you would just be spending a lot of time not making any decisions and like, you know, committee. Like, yeah, I recall like some of the problems like that we had at some point is basically like, you know, design and development by a committee. And then at some point, like I woke up, I saw like we had like 40 people working on fucking like adding, like making rounded checkboxes. Like, why are 40 people like looped in on this? You know, and that's kind of like because like, yeah, you want to loop in a lot of people, but like that's not really how you make a great culture, like how you actually make things go fast. It's kind of like you need to really reduce it to as few people as possible. Yeah, so that's maybe like just decision making and asynchronous. Yeah. So,
but Amir, just one point on that. You know, just thinking about culture more, a little bit, pulling out a little bit about the async versus sync. Where you know, a lot of people say remote teams don't have. Well, I've not heard it, but I can imagine people say that remote teams don't have as much culture as an in-person team. But for me, I think it's almost entirely untrue because a remote team has like this debate of async versus sync. Some companies are very async, some are very sync, some are somewhere in between. Not only that, you know, if you even look at forums, let's say your company never is only writes or everything is written, and you're using a product like Twist. Well, as you guys know from different forums, well, Hacker News is a very different culture than some, you know, growth hacker, you know, happy website. The culture inside a company is defined by like how people type things, how nice are they when you mention something, how quick are they to respond, how willing to give feedback are they, and it's the same things in real life than in person. I think that's one thing I just want to make a shout out, that online remote companies, even if they're completely, let's say two are completely async, the same way of operating, they could have completely different cultures in the same way.
Oh, that is such a powerful I think, comment, Johnny. And honestly, like, I think also, like, yeah, that's also something, like, when people tell me also, like, you know, you can have a strong culture in like a fully remote company as an office. I'm just like, bullshit, like, you know. And the thing is, like, you can have a lot of communities. I mean, just look like Wall Street bets on Reddit to see like a complete insane culture, you know, like and then some other the subreddits, and you know, that's like all virtual, that's all text, that's kind of like, you know, that's a culture, like, you know. And also some of these are very fun, some are very dark, like, you know, Hacker News is kind of like just like some of the comments are super toxic and like super negative, super pessimistic. So, you know, like, yeah, I think that's a really, really spot on comment. Yeah. I mean, let's maybe like touch something that I think like is super maybe interesting to people. I know, like, you know, for the running remote conferences that have been live, like fundraising has always been a topic that people bring up, because I think a lot of people really struggle with this, and especially like in a remote setting, like, you know, a few years ago, like VCs wouldn't even talk to you if you had like a remote company. So like this has changed, and things changed for the better. So I would just love to hear this, and I would actually, Johnny, especially your story, like you struggle so much with this, and then like you raise 400 million, something like that. Like what has changed, or what is the cheat code here? And I think like, Øyvind, you also have like some experience with this, so you know, let's bring the tips for the people that are struggling with this.
Okay, there's so many tips on fundraising. Okay, and I think they go by stages again. So. All right, so let's start at the earliest stages of like when you don't have a you know, if I overtalk, or even feel free to just ping in wherever you need. The point is from when you have a small idea and let's say it's innovative or it's a play, and you can't convince someone to use it, you need to get in front of people and they need to see your excitement. That's the number one thing. Where your excitement show, like that's what investors want to see. They want to see really ambitious people that are excited, because hard work, unfortunately, maybe it's not the PC thing to say, but hard work is the number one way to almost make sure you're going to do well at the early stages. I truly, you cannot, I don't think you can do it without working hard. And I don't think you can do it without your early team working hard. So if you're excited, it probably means you're going to work hard. That's what that's what they'll see. And it means that you're going to be able to sell people, because you can sell investors. So the earliest stage is try to connect, whether it's through a video call. Nowadays, there's ways to do it through events. There's ways to do it through like whereby, you know, you can set up a meeting, whatever it is, set up a meeting with an investor, try and get a warm intro, maybe meet a founder, because that's what worked for me. Was eventually I actually got my first intro to an investor who would actually meet me through a founder that I had met, who was like, oh, I like this thing, let me connect you. You know, and founders tend to be really, really friendly people, because they've all probably received help at some stage, and they're willing to give it back in a lot of cases. So there's a great culture right now in tech for giving back. And then 25 plus, or, you know, raising that Series A, it's showing a little bit of metrics, but you're still talking about the big picture. This is how we're going to win. This is how we're going to become a really big company. You're exciting people, et cetera. And at Series C level, you know, by that time, you'll probably have tons of investors who already know about you. So it's about consistency. So for us, it was high growth, showing that we're going to consistently grow fast. And then, okay, what happens when you start growing slower? Well, then we're going to do this to go faster. And, you know, having the answer and making it super clear why you know, what our vision is, what the game plan is, being able to like show that we've hired the best team. Like the bigger your company gets, and even at an earlier stage, the people you attract, a lot of that is very attractive to investors. If you're attracting top tier talent, if you're building beautiful product, if your revenues are growing and all that sort of stuff, you know. But I would say this, after the first round, I think that's the hardest round, especially if maybe for me now, it'd be easier to go back and start again because I have a contact list. But a lot of you who don't have a contact list, I'm sure, that is the most painful part about raising your first round, is when you don't have a contact list and you're trying to just like meet people to raise around. So yeah, get some warm intros.
I think that's bang on, right? Fundraising is always going to be challenging. I don't think that will ever become easy, and it's something that I think most founders have to work at in order to master. Some are more talented than others and can make it more easy. But if you don't, I really like what Johnny is saying here about getting warm intros from other founders. So small story on us from that side was that we fell in love with a product called ChartMogul that does a lot of our metrics based on the input from Stripe. And I met the founder there, Nick Franklin, who offered to introduce me to Christoph Jans from Point 9 Capital. And they are now an investor. So because of that warm intro, you actually get something way more than just trying to reach out through the regular channel. So I would say if you can go through other founders, that is always a great idea. I want to take it a tiny bit back though, because it's interesting what's happening now in the industry. Like back in 2015, I was trying to fundraise for my other business. That was a Norwegian headquartered company, but we have a setup in Boston. Every investor that I spoke to there said, yeah, this is interesting, but you need to reincorporate in Delaware, so it's a US entity. That is now almost completely gone. The investors I've spoken to now have said, well, that's not relevant anymore. So that's the good news, right? Capital is also abundant, but what's really interesting is to see that most of the money goes into the best companies. So it's actually quite difficult to raise capital because everyone thinks it looks super easy now because of the inflation on the valuations, etc. But it's actually quite complicated. Cool part for remote teams is that at least now you can finally do it without needing to be and travel to San Francisco to do it. And I think that's the key part. But many of the same ideas and many of the same tips and advice that you've seen from before, I think are still just as relevant, right? You need to show progress. You need to show that you can execute. You need to show that you can hire a really great team. And you have to build these relationships over time. They take a long time to build really strong relationships. But I think once you have them, they are also transformational to your company.
Those are super great tips. And also, there's a different route. It's kind of like bootstrapping and indie hacker.
A better route.
A better route. Yeah.
I mean, I think that's a lot of like, like that's something that I'm very inspired by, especially like, sometimes I just go to indie hacker and like people are doing like crazy stuff. They are making like a nice living and like trying to, just, contribute with something. Maybe it's not like hyper scaling, but it's still, it can be significant. And so, fundraising, I think like it's a lot of like a really tough topic. And also a lot of people think like you can only be successful if you fundraise. And then like, also like if you look at the numbers, like it's only a few like companies that actually fundraise, especially like VC, and also like maybe a few companies that are like, compatible with the VC model. Like you need to create like the next Google for them to be super successful. That's their whole business model. So let's maybe like please.
I think you're so right, and this is such an important shout out, right? Not every company is built for hyperscale. We, for instance, bootstrapped for many years until the market decided that you have been fortunate enough to be cherry-picked to go to that next level. And then it's almost like we couldn't stop it even if we wanted to, right? So I think so many companies always think today that you can only be successful if you raise more capital, right? And some even seem to think that that's having the highest valuation, that's the top of success. It really isn't. And combining that with it's okay to build a company over 5, 6, 7, 10 years, 15 years. There are so many great success stories by just founders and companies being extremely resilient and growing in a much more organic way and without needing to take on huge amounts of capital. So I think that's a very good shout out that we should always keep in mind, that not every company is set up or can actually achieve it. Building a great company, being bootstrapped, is actually the ultimate challenge. It's really, really challenging, and it's really, really good when you can do it.
That's spot on, Øyvind. I think like also something like if you start bootstrapping, you have more options. Like you can, raise money or not. And you can also just like control your fate much easier. That's at least like what I have figured out is like, I have like both raised money and been like in this like hyper growth. Like I did a social network before this, and I have also like been in a bootstrap mode. And it's kind of like, I think like the bootstrap mode is like you can much easier control your fate. Yeah, so that's something to note. And Danny is back here. Hello, Danny.
Yeah. Hey, Amir. It's so interesting how that conversation has changed around fundraising remotely, around capital not going outside of Northern California, right? And it is real. People widely use term right now as sort of democratization, right? But it is a reality in the world of venture capital at this point that it is everywhere, and all of you are just a tremendous example of that. How about we get to the questions? Everybody good with that?
Go for it.
Cool. I actually, Amir, you've been asking the questions. I want to ask this one of you, okay? It's from Alexander Skep. And Alexander says, how do you make sure people have a mindset that will work in remote organizations? Do you hire on skill and educate people, or do you set the expectations from the start? Right? Do you hire for culture? Do you hire for skill? And how do you make sure they have that doist mindset, really?
Good luck, Amir.
I think actually like something to note, like a cheat code again that you can use here. And like, I think we were way too late about this, is like defining our core values. And these aren't like bullshit. Like we actually started with 14. Where like teamwork maybe was one of them. Teamwork is a very bad core value because like it doesn't really, like, nobody can disagree with like teamwork, or maybe
it doesn't say anything.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So like you really need to like go in deep and figure out like what is actually really important for your organization. What is like currently the culture inside the company. So for us, for instance, like mastery, like learning, like that is super, super critical. And then you define that and you look for these values in the people that you hire, because like if you don't, like if somebody does not really like to learn new stuff, does not really like to challenge themselves, does not want to become the best at the world that they craft, then they should not be part of the culture. So I think this is really, really important. And then like something we do is like we share these openly on like our BAD page. They are listed. A lot of like this general structure inside the company, like how we compensate, how we evaluate people, they are like rooted in the core values. So that's something I think like that is super, super critical for us. It's kind of like trying to define that and then hire people that kind of fit into these molds. Yeah.
Very, very well said. Defining those values and ensuring that everybody really lives and breathes those. Øyvind, I'll ask you this question. It's from Julia Hogg. How do you facilitate the unofficial and unstructured information sharing that used to happen in the coffee kitchen? How do you ensure that exists and it is perhaps, now that it's a remote environment, even documented properly?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. And this is, again, something that I believe has to be dynamic and improve over time. I think where we have invested quite a lot is allowing for different tools for different teams, right? Now, that can easily scale out to something that's unmanageable. But having the ability to access people faster, that could be through the likes of Slack, for instance, or it could be that you use Notion for parts of it, or doing video calls, for instance. But I think the best way to do it is just to open up and say that reaching out and asking questions and wanting to learn is a core part of the culture that we want to bring and build, right? You should be okay to reach out and ask questions of others. If there's something that you don't understand, you don't feel comfortable with, or you don't know the reason for the decision that was made. So I think that is a vital part of this. You have to build those parts into every team member, that is okay. But it's a really, really challenging thing to do because they used to happen over the water cooler, right? So some things that we do is that we set up, we have something in Slack that we call Donut that basically just sets us up with other people during the workday. and you spend time chatting about no specific topic.
Yeah, that's a popular tool. Amir, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, like I think there's like some misconception, and I think like this kind of points to like the culture as well, like misconception that you can't have strong culture in a remote setting. I think like it's also innovation in a remote setting. Like, I think like it's a complete like lie maybe to think that innovation happens around the water cooler or like a whiteboarding, like, oh, I have the best idea.
One of the great fallacies, Amir, right? Like one of the great fallacies of workplace culture, probably. It just probably isn't true.
Yeah. And honestly, like something that you see, like if you are in like a remote first, asynchronous first companies, like there's so many ideas, like people come with so much like input. It's actually very, very overwhelming to contain that. It's the reverse isn't like true, where like you don't have enough like ideas, like things you can do, or like people coming up with like crazy things. Like you have so much of it that you're really overwhelmed. So I think like containing that and like filtering that becomes a much bigger problem than actually facilitating that. So yeah, that's just like something I wanted to add there.
We're just winding down with a couple minutes left here. One of the questions, one of the things that I thought was really interesting, Johnny, and this is related to a couple of the questions here, was sort of that transition to async, right? If people are used to sharing ideas on the water cooler, they're also used to collaborating in real time and in meetings. And you had mentioned that was a transition that your organization had made recently. Like, how do you orient people around that being a reality of the company itself, that async does work?
So for us, I mean, it's quite clear when someone joins the company that, I would actually say Hopin is probably the prototypical. We took the model that you would have in a company inside an office and we brought it online. And what I mean by that is some companies go more async and they assume that, hey, people don't actually need to meet together because now we're online, so let's just think. And then others say they should be meeting 24/7 and you should have like some sort of app that like make sure I can like tap someone on the shoulder anytime and get on video call with them, just like in an office. And we went the opposite direction. We went to some middle direction where I think most companies are on, even if they're using, they are using some sort of collaboration software, like the ones from, like Twist, like Slack, one of them. And so they're using that in the office for most of their day-to-day communication, and they attend meetings from time to time in different like rooms, let's say, of the building. We're the same, but we use Slack and we use products that allow us to collaborate and tie, like we put out big notes and Google Docs for setting up like a PRD or explaining something to someone before they get in, commenting where we use meetings just like we would in a real office. Meetings are there, and we'll use video conferencing to basically spur those conversations live and where we need to. So I think it's not unlike what they're experiencing in the office. The big difference that they're getting is no water killer chat, is no, beers after work. Is no, if you're used to moving up the corporate environment by having a cigarette with someone who's a superior outside, you're not gonna find any of those things that happen. You're also not gonna find a need to be there from 9 to 5. We don't care when you're working. So you take away all the other stuff, but the actual way we operate is very similar to how they do at work. So people don't find like a big change. And that's I think the interesting thing is, because all the companies, maybe if you were using email only as a company, but most companies are using Microsoft Teams today, Twist, they're using Slack, etc. So the point is, like, I think even in-person companies, right, or in-person companies are essentially, that's why when the world went to COVID, we didn't all shut down. They just continued working almost the same way, but without having that day-to-day interaction that they're used to in an office. And that's the point that I want to make. I think it's the life culture of the work and not the actual working culture that changes when you move remote. The life culture changes because, I think it's better in a lot of ways. I'm going to be completely honest with you guys. We have done a huge survey. We do it every 3 months. We do a small one. And how proud are you to be a Hopin? All these different things. But also one of them was, work life. How do you prefer remote versus in person, and how happy are you? The biggest one we got was a feeling of belonging, and we have, overall, Hopin has really great scores. No pitch, but slight pitch. We have over 90% people are very, very happy to be here, and typical SaaS about 60. But for belonging scores, when we broke it down by age group, it was lower among people from 20 to 25 years old. Not all of them, but a lot of them who wanted to get drinks with someone. And maybe this is COVID, people that maybe wanted to have, but whereas those who had kids or those who maybe are a bit older and, didn't need like a junior engineer. Today, we don't have we don't have any junior engineers. We haven't figured out how do we train someone remotely so they get enough face time with someone to code. But I'm sure it can be solved remotely, but we just haven't because of how fast we move. So there is like pros and cons with everything. Async versus sync. There's 100%. I will never
perfect mix, right? It's
exactly
just about what works for your culture and your organization.
Exactly. I would never advocate for a perfect culture. It's the culture that works for you.
We got to run here, guys. Speaking of being quick, I just want to ask one question. It's paraphrasing a question from Myra Castillo. Myra says, do you consider there should be a position specifically to maintain work culture through team activities and team building in a remote company? Paraphrasing, when do you need a head of remote? Do you need a head of remote? Yes or no? Øyvind, we'll start with you.
I would say yes. Unsure at what time. But what I would say, it's actually the responsibility of every single individual to take care of that remote part. Don't take it for granted. Be a contributor. Be a team player. If you can get that part right, there is less of a need for someone to fulfill that role as an individual.
Amir, head of remote?
I mean, we are actually like in the process of like hiring or like promoting somebody into this role as well. I think like it's really critical, and I think GitLab has done a great job to kind of like promote this role and like invent it maybe a bit. So I would definitely recommend like Darren from GitLab, which I think is kind of like the first head of remote.
He's on the Rushmore of head of remotes, basically.
Yeah. He's kind of like the front leader there. But yeah, honestly, I think like it's super critical, and like for us, like it's really. And I fully agree with Øyvind. Like I think it's everybody's responsibility, but I think like for us, it's really important that we have like somebody that's accountable or responsible for like the remote structures, culture, and stuff like that. Yeah.
Johnny, we got to jump. Is there a head of remote in the Vibe team? Yes or no? I mean, you got the Vibe
Yes.
team. Why do you need head of remote?
There is a head of remote, but I don't think you need a head of remote. Depends on what you're trying to do. Some people use a head of remote to do internal tooling, et cetera. Some people use it as a social media influencer to attract people to your brand.
Johnny, by the way, there were so many questions about the Vibe team. It's like certainly going to be one of the hot button topics today. Absolute legends. They're on the Rushmore of remote first CEOs. Amir, Øyvind, and Johnny, thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you, Danny.
Thanks so much.
We'll take a break. We'll be right back here on Running Remote Online.